It began 3 weeks ago. That night, the sky was ink black, swallowing even the brightest stars. Living at the edge of town always had its charm, peaceful solitude, the soft whispers of nature. But that evening, the silence felt different. Thicker somehow, heavy with anticipation. Midnight struck precisely. Not a second before, not a second later. The knock came like clockwork. 3 sharp, deliberate taps against my front door. Each tap echoed through the empty halls of my house like a countdown to something I wasn't ready for. My heart leaped into my throat as confusion wrestled with apprehension. Nobody visited at this hour. Nobody visited at all, if I was honest. The isolation suited me, but tonight it felt distinctly unsettling. I rose slowly from the couch, laying aside the book I'd long since stopped paying attention to, and walked cautiously toward the entrance. Through the peephole, I glimpsed a figure standing motionless in the faint glow of the porch lamp. He was tall, slim, dressed in a familiar dark blue uniform with silver buttons that caught the lamplight oddly. A postal cap tilted low over his face, hiding his eyes completely. A mailman at midnight? My mind reeled at the absurdity of the scenario. I opened the door a cautious crack, the cold autumn breeze slicing sharply across my face. "Can I help you?" The figure made no immediate response. Instead, he slowly extended a pale, slender hand toward me. In his grasp was an envelope unlike any I'd seen before. Pure black, matte, and seamless, without stamp or return address. Only my name written elegantly in flowing silver ink. Under the porch light, the letters shimmered, almost liquid. "Mail doesn't come this late," I said nervously, my fingers hesitating. The mailman tilted his head slightly, just enough for his pale lips to move beneath the brim of his cap. His voice emerged as barely more than a whisper, the faint sound of dry paper sliding against paper. "Special delivery. Some messages can only be delivered at midnight." I glanced at the envelope again, curiosity mingling uneasily with dread. With a trembling hand, I reached out and took it from him, noticing how icy cold his fingers were, even colder than the chilly night warranted. "There must be some mistake," I started. But when I raised my eyes again, he was already moving away, stepping off my porch and fading into the darkness beyond with an unnatural swiftness. One blink, and he was gone, leaving nothing behind but a lingering chill and the black envelope heavy in my palm. I locked the door quickly, turning the deadbolt twice. The silence inside the house returned, deeper now, interrupted only by my uneven breathing. I carried the envelope to the living room, my hands still shaking, and set it on the coffee table. Its silver lettering seemed to glow faintly beneath the lamp. Taking a deep breath, I slipped a finger under the seal and carefully tore it open, half expecting something terrible to leap from its depths. But there was only a single sheet of smooth black paper inside, and written upon it were words, elegant and chilling, that seemed to stare back at me. "The first message is always a warning. Listen carefully. Time is running out." My pulse quickened as the room seemed to shrink around me, shadows deepening in every corner. I sat there for hours, rereading the cryptic note, wondering who could be behind this bizarre midnight delivery. Sleep evaded me that night as I searched desperately online for any trace of a midnight mail service. Nothing appeared. My mind spun through possibilities. Pranksters, neighbors, misguided practical jokes, but nothing felt right. And then I saw the clock again, catching my breath as I realized how quickly the hours had slipped away. Dawn was approaching. I stood by the window, looking out toward the darkness where the mailman had vanished. Somehow, deep in the marrow of my bones, I knew this wasn't over. Whatever the message meant, whatever waited ahead, this midnight visitor had set something terrible into motion, and time was running out. The week following that first midnight delivery passed slowly, as though each moment was stretched thin, dripping with anxiety and suspicion. Every shadow seemed darker. Every whisper of wind outside sounded like footsteps approaching. For days, I convinced myself it had been nothing more than a twisted prank, perhaps a cruel joke played by bored teens from town. But no matter how many logical explanations I tried to conjure, the memory of that icy hand and its cryptic message haunted me. The first message is always a warning. Listen carefully. Time is running out. I had obsessively checked online forums, chat rooms, and local news, searching for anything resembling my midnight encounter. Nothing appeared. The incident seemed unique to me, leaving me isolated and afraid. Sleep became scarce, coming only in fragments filled with uneasy dreams of black envelopes fluttering in the dark. Exactly 7 days later, at midnight, I was wide awake, heart hammering in my chest. I sat near the living room window, curtains drawn back slightly, eyes straining into the night. If it was a prankster, tonight I'd catch them in the act. The clock on the mantelpiece began chiming softly, 12 deep, resonant notes. As the final chime faded, the porch lamp flickered for a moment. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes again, my yard was no longer empty. He didn't approach from down the street or emerge from behind the trees. He simply appeared, stepping smoothly from shadow as though born from it. The mailman's dark blue uniform absorbed the faint moonlight, making him look like a hole cut out of the night itself. My pulse raced uncontrollably. I stumbled back from the window, panic tightening around my chest. It couldn't be real, yet there he was again, calmly walking toward my door. The knocking began. 3 sharp, precise raps, each like a dagger striking my nerves. I didn't want to answer, yet my body moved forward involuntarily, as if an invisible force were drawing me nearer. This time, I opened the door only a crack, just enough to peer cautiously outside. The mailman stood closer now, the porch lamp illuminating more of his face beneath the low brim of his cap. His skin was pale, almost translucent, threaded with delicate blue veins. But worst of all were his eyes, or what should have been eyes. They were milky, featureless orbs, yet somehow, I knew he saw me clearly. "No," I stammered, voice barely a whisper. "Not again. Leave me alone." Without a word, he extended another black envelope, identical to the first. The silver script shone eerily under the porch light, but I recoiled, unwilling to take it. "I don't want this," I said more firmly, attempting to close the door. But with shocking strength, the mailman thrust his foot forward, effortlessly holding the door open. His voice was clearer this time, stronger, layered with something darker beneath. "It must be delivered," he hissed. "Refusal is not an option." My hands trembled uncontrollably as I reached for the envelope, pulling it quickly inside. The instant I accepted it, the mailman withdrew, melting back into darkness as abruptly as he'd appeared. I slammed the door shut, locking every bolt, heart racing furiously. Back inside, I dropped the envelope onto the coffee table, hesitating briefly before tearing it open, desperate for answers. This time, the letter contained no vague warnings, only a neatly printed list of 5 names beside dates. I scanned the names, none familiar, but my heart sank at the implications. A creeping dread took hold of me. The last date listed was tomorrow. Driven by a sense of urgency and growing fear, I spent the following day researching the names, hoping my suspicions were misplaced. But what I discovered plunged me deeper into despair. Every person on the list had died on the exact date noted beside their names. Accidents, heart attacks, sudden unexplained deaths. Except the last name. Her name was Sarah Andrews, and she lived only 2 streets away. I hesitated briefly, unsure what to do. Who would believe a story of a midnight mailman delivering death notices? But I couldn't live with doing nothing. Grabbing my keys, I drove quickly to Sarah's address, anxiety twisting my gut as I approached her street. I stopped the car abruptly. Parked outside Sarah's home were police vehicles, an ambulance, and neighbors clustered solemnly on the sidewalk. A sinking dread filled me as I stepped out of the car and approached an elderly neighbor watching quietly. "What happened here?" I asked shakily. "Tragic," the woman murmured sadly. "Sarah passed away early this morning. They think it was her heart, just stopped in her sleep. She was so young." But the date, I whispered to myself, confused. The date said tomorrow. Unless... I rushed home, frantically retrieving the letter. My stomach churned as I realized my mistake. The date beside Sarah's name wasn't tomorrow. It was today. Midnight had already marked the new day. Sarah had been dead before the letter reached my hand. A chill ran through me as I stared at the remaining blank spaces beneath Sarah's name, as though waiting to be filled. A terrible suspicion grew within me. Would my name soon appear? And as the shadows lengthened around me once more, I knew the nightmare was far from over. After Sarah's death, reality itself seemed to shift around me. Sleep became a stranger, and my nights were spent pacing anxiously, peering into the shadows that danced across my windows. The mailman's words haunted my every thought. The first message is always a warning. Listen carefully. Time is running out. Each tick of the clock echoed painfully through my empty home, counting down toward the next inevitable delivery. I wouldn't wait helplessly again. This time, I'd be ready. I spent the next several days setting up surveillance around my property. Cameras faced every possible angle of approach: the driveway, the porch, the yard. I triple-checked every lock, secured every window, and left no shadow unexplored. Yet despite all my preparations, dread continued to gnaw at me, whispering that none of it mattered, that he would still find a way in. On the seventh day, midnight approached once again. Anxiety coiled tightly in my chest as I sat watching the live camera feeds on my laptop, illuminated only by the pale glow of the screens. A baseball bat lay beside me on the couch, comforting though likely useless against the unnatural entity I faced. 11:58 p.m. I waited, breath shallow, palms sweating. 11:59 p.m. The yard was still, bathed in the dim glow of the porch lamp. No movement, just the steady rustle of wind through the autumn leaves. Midnight. Nothing. No knock, no footsteps, only silence. I held my breath, eyes locked desperately onto the screens. Minutes passed, agonizingly slow, each heartbeat echoing louder in my ears. Finally, exhaustion and relief mixed, blurring my vision. Maybe he'd decided to spare me tonight. Maybe he'd moved on. Eventually, fatigue overtook me, and despite my resolve, my eyelids grew heavy. The bat slipped from my grasp, hitting the floor with a dull thud as sleep dragged me into darkness. I woke with a start, sunlight streaming harshly through the living room window. Panic surged through my veins as I scanned the room wildly. Nothing seemed disturbed. The cameras still displayed empty views of the porch and yard. Relief flooded through me, but was short-lived. On the coffee table, stark against the morning sun, lay another black envelope. A chill crept up my spine as I reached for it, my fingers trembling violently. It wasn't possible. No alarms triggered, no doors disturbed, nothing captured on my cameras. Yet somehow, he delivered it silently, unnoticed. I tore it open, my breath catching painfully in my throat. This message was different. Inside wasn't a note nor a list. Instead, it was a single photograph, glossy and sharp. It was me, asleep in my chair, mouth slightly open, bat lying uselessly at my feet. The picture was taken from inside my own home, from the shadows of the hallway opposite where I sat. I turned the photograph over slowly, hands trembling, and read the silver script on the back. The final message requires no words. My heart slammed painfully in my chest as panic surged through me. The watcher had become the watched. The sanctuary I'd believed secure had been invaded effortlessly. How long had he been standing there, silently observing me as I slept? A sudden wave of nausea overtook me. I couldn't stay here. Not anymore. My home had become his playground, and I was helplessly trapped within it. I packed frantically, a few essentials stuffed hurriedly into a bag, and left, desperate to put distance between myself and the mailman's silent menace. I drove aimlessly, finally stopping at a rundown motel 2 towns over, registering under a false name. Once inside, I bolted the door shut, checked and rechecked the lock, then swallowed sleeping pills to force the rest my mind desperately needed. As I drifted into unconsciousness, I set an alarm for 11:45 p.m., determined never to be caught unaware again. But in my dreams, I saw only him, the pale figure with empty white eyes, watching patiently, knowing exactly where I was, where I would always be. I stared at my phone screen, my thumb hovering over the notification. Alternative delivery method. The words seemed to pulse softly, daring me to open them. My breath caught, heart racing wildly as I felt a familiar dread rising. I shook my head sharply, placing the phone face down on my bedside table. I wouldn't make the same mistake again. I wouldn't open it. I wouldn't let the message reach me. But sleep was impossible now. The quiet rustling I'd heard earlier grew louder, unmistakable, coming from somewhere nearby. I strained to listen, holding my breath. Silence. Then again, that soft whispering, like hundreds of envelopes brushing against each other, closer now. My blood chilled. How long had it been since the mailman vanished? 2 weeks? 3? Long enough to convince me it was over. Long enough to let my guard down. The rustling intensified, joined now by gentle tapping against the window pane. Carefully, I drew the curtains aside. Nothing. Only the empty darkness outside, leaves dancing gently in the breeze. But then I noticed something odd. The mailbox at the end of my driveway was open, flapping lightly in the wind. I was certain I'd closed it tightly earlier, paranoid from weeks of fear. A feeling of suffocating anxiety gripped me. Without thinking, I ran outside into the cold night air, my footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. Reaching the mailbox, I stopped short. Inside lay another black envelope. My throat tightened. I hadn't seen him deliver it. There were no knocks, no shadows, just silence, and this envelope waiting quietly, patiently, as though it had always been there. "No," I whispered fiercely. "I won't." Yet despite my determination, my fingers moved toward it, compelled by a force stronger than my own will. As I touched the smooth paper, the mailbox door slammed shut violently, narrowly missing my fingers. I jerked backward, clutching the envelope in horror. Panicked, I tore it open, desperate to end whatever nightmare this was becoming. Inside, printed neatly in silver, were 2 words. Too late. I spun around, breath catching painfully. The air was thick, charged with tension as though something watched me from every shadow. Suddenly, the streetlights along the road began flickering and died one by one, plunging the neighborhood into pitch-black darkness. I sprinted back toward my house, heart hammering violently. But as I reached the porch steps, a familiar silhouette stepped forward from the shadows. The mailman stood motionless, pale face illuminated faintly by moonlight, those white, pupilless eyes staring straight through me. "You can't be here," I gasped, voice trembling. "I returned your messages. It's over." He tilted his head slowly. His lips parted slightly, and his voice came in a dry rasp, layered and distorted, echoing like multiple voices speaking together. "The message always finds its recipient," he said calmly. "Returning it is temporary. Refusal merely delays what must come." "What do you want from me?" I shouted, desperation cracking my voice. "Why me?" "I do not choose," he replied softly, his head tilting further, impossibly far, like a marionette on strings. "I merely deliver." Suddenly, he stepped closer, the air around him rippling, distorting, as if reality struggled to contain him. I backed away, tripping over the bottom porch step and falling hard onto the cold pavement. He leaned down, extending his hand once more. His palm opened, revealing a small black envelope, shimmering under the faint starlight. "Accept it," he hissed. "Accept, and end your suffering." I scrambled back, shaking my head violently. "No!" I screamed. "Never again!" The mailman's form shimmered and blurred, his milky eyes glowing faintly. "You cannot run from what is addressed to you," he whispered harshly. "No place exists beyond our reach." Then, abruptly, he straightened. His form grew less defined, fading slowly into the shadows around him, his voice a lingering whisper carried on the wind. The delivery will come again. It always does. Left alone in the darkness, I stumbled into my house, locking every door, every window, knowing deep down it was futile. I dropped onto the couch, hands covering my face, mind racing desperately for a solution. Hours passed, dawn slowly chasing the shadows away. Yet, even in the brightness of daylight, his presence remained, an oppressive heaviness filling every corner. I knew then, with awful clarity, that wherever I ran, whatever precautions I took, it didn't matter. The message had found its way back to me. The mailman would return, as certain and relentless as midnight itself. I wasn't just trapped by fear, I was trapped by fate. Days passed slowly after the arrival of that ominous email. I kept my phone face down, notifications muted, and moved cautiously through my house, as if expecting something to leap out at me from every shadow. I didn't dare open my inbox again. I refused to become a recipient once more. But isolation had its cost. Friends called less frequently, sensing my withdrawal. My coworkers began to look at me with suspicion as fatigue and paranoia etched deeper lines into my face. Even daylight became oppressive, the sun harsh and accusing, illuminating my fear rather than easing it. Then, exactly 7 days after that email, at precisely midnight, my phone vibrated again. Its faint buzz reverberated through the silent house like an alarm. My stomach clenched painfully. Unable to resist, I picked it up, staring helplessly at the notification glowing brightly on the screen. This time, the sender had no name, only a single digit, 0. The subject read simply, "Undelivered mail notice." I held my breath. I wouldn't open it. Couldn't open it. Yet suddenly, the screen flickered violently, distorted lines crawling over it like static. Before I could react, the email opened itself, displaying a single sentence. "Messages refused digitally will be delivered physically." As the words sank in, every light in the house flickered simultaneously, plunging me briefly into pitch blackness before returning with a low, buzzing hum. My breath caught sharply in my throat. A knock echoed through the front door. Slow, deliberate, familiar. 3 sharp raps. Heart pounding, I moved slowly, numbly toward the door. Peering through the peephole, my blood froze. The porch was empty, yet the knocking continued, louder now, vibrating through my bones. Steeling myself, I flung open the door, prepared to confront whatever stood on the other side. No one was there. Instead, neatly placed at my feet, lay a small black package wrapped carefully in silver string. My name glittered on top in familiar liquid silver script. Every instinct screamed to leave it untouched, to kick it away, to burn it. But another impulse, darker, deeper, compelled my fingers forward. As I lifted it, the wrapping crumbled to ash in my hands, revealing a small wooden box carved intricately with strange, spiraling symbols. Holding it gently, I stepped back inside, locking the door securely behind me, though by now, I knew locks were meaningless. Carefully, I opened the box. Inside, nestled upon black velvet, rested a small silver key and another folded note. "Your refusal binds you tighter. Deliver the next message yourself, or suffer the consequences." My pulse hammered in my ears. This was new. Terrifyingly new. Beneath the note was another envelope, identical to the others I'd received, except this time, it was addressed to someone else, someone named Jonathan Greer. I felt sick. I didn't know him, yet his name sent chills down my spine. Was this a test, a trick, or worse? A curse passed from one unwilling messenger to another. But as the clock ticked past midnight, my dread intensified. I had until tomorrow midnight to deliver the envelope, or face whatever horror awaited refusal. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind raced through possibilities, each darker than the last. Should I destroy the envelope, hide it, or deliver it to Jonathan Greer and condemn him to the same torment? By morning, desperation had given way to determination. I drove into town, hoping to find Greer, Warn him somehow without delivering the envelope. Perhaps together we could stop this madness. After a frantic search, I finally found his home. A modest house nestled between tall oaks on a quiet street. Heart pounding, I approached his porch, hesitating as I raised my hand to knock. Before my fist landed, the door swung open suddenly, revealing a weary, terrified face staring back at me. Jonathan Greer stood frozen, staring at the black envelope clutched in my trembling hand. "You too," he whispered, voice hollow, eyes sunken with exhaustion. I thought I was the only one. I stepped forward quickly, lowering my voice urgently. "We have to find a way to stop this. Tell me everything you know." But Jonathan shook his head slowly, defeated. "There is no stopping it. Not by running, not by hiding." He glanced at the envelope, eyes haunted. "You can't deliver it. You'll just prolong the cycle." My heart sank. Then what do we do? Jonathan looked up sharply, eyes darkening with sudden resolve. "We confront the messenger at the source." He stepped aside, inviting me in. And as the door closed softly behind me, I knew we were no longer mere recipients. We had become hunters, chasing a messenger whose deliveries had haunted humanity far longer than we imagined. But somewhere deep inside, I wondered if we weren't running straight into a trap, one from which there would be no escape. The rustling grew louder each night, the whispers of paper and the faint tapping sounds always there, just beyond sight. Days blended into restless nights, each filled with dread, exhaustion, and relentless paranoia. Every unopened email weighed on me like a curse, a ticking clock I couldn't escape. Determined to regain control, I began digging deeper, tracing the phenomena of midnight deliveries throughout history. Hours melted away in libraries, combing through old newspapers, obscure legends, and whispered folklore. As my research deepened, a chilling pattern emerged. Over centuries, similar stories surfaced, strange, nocturnal messengers bearing dark tidings to recipients who never survived long afterward. Always at midnight, always inevitable, always lethal. But there was one recurring detail in these tales, one place repeatedly mentioned: the abandoned postal annex on the outskirts of town. Built nearly a century ago, long forgotten, it had closed abruptly after unexplained disappearances and tragedies. The building sat quietly decaying in shadows, a haunted relic of undelivered mail and broken lives. I had to go there. If the cycle was to be broken, it had to start at the source. That night, armed with a flashlight and my courage stretched thin, I drove to the annex. The old brick building loomed ahead, its shattered windows gaping like hollow eyes. Ivy climbed the walls, nature slowly reclaiming what humanity had forsaken. As I pushed open the rusted door, it groaned in protest, the sound reverberating through cavernous hallways thick with mold and decay. Inside, moonlight spilled through cracked skylights, illuminating layers of scattered envelopes and parcels. Mountains of undelivered mail filled every room, each envelope blackened and brittle with age. Walking deeper, I sensed a malevolent presence, an oppressive heaviness that squeezed the air from my lungs. The rustling intensified around me, paper whispering softly as though mocking my intrusion. Then, suddenly, I saw him, standing at the far end of the largest sorting room. The midnight mailman faced me silently, uniform pristine amid the decay, milky eyes glowing dimly. Hundreds of black envelopes circled him like a swarm of paper insects, fluttering silently in impossible formations. "You shouldn't be here," he said calmly, voice echoing softly through the room. "I'm ending this," I replied defiantly, trying to steady my voice. "Whatever you are, whatever curse binds you, it stops now." He tilted his head curiously. "Endings are beyond your power," he whispered, his voice layered with 1,000 rustling sheets. "I am eternal, as is the message I bear." I stepped closer, voice shaking but resolved. "Why me? Why any of us?" His mouth twisted into a cold imitation of a smile. "The letters choose the recipients. They seek those marked by fate, those whose time has been decided." My heart pounded furiously. "And the undelivered ones?" His expression darkened, the envelope swirling faster around him. Those who refuse delivery trap themselves between life and death, forever waiting, forever watched. He raised his hand slowly, envelopes swirling and coalescing into a massive vortex above him, the wind howling as papers danced violently around the room. "But perhaps," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the storm of paper, "you've come to accept your fate at last." I shook my head, defiant. Never. With a gesture, the envelope surged toward me, slicing the air like razor blades. Instinctively, I raised my flashlight, shielding my face, stumbling backward as the torrent of paper battered me, cutting my skin, whispering dark promises of oblivion. Collapsing to the floor, gasping, I saw something gleaming on the ground. A tarnished silver pocket watch, engraved with intricate symbols, lying among the scattered mail. Reaching desperately, I snatched it up, feeling a strange surge of warmth pulse through my fingers. The mailman faltered, suddenly frozen, white eyes widening in alarm. "Return that," he hissed urgently, stepping forward. "It is not yours." I rose slowly, clutching the watch tightly, feeling it hum powerfully against my palm. "This ends here," I repeated firmly, seeing genuine fear in his hollow gaze for the first time. With trembling hands, I pressed the watch's crown, turning it back slowly, feeling reality shudder around me. Time bent strangely, a kaleidoscope of shadows and whispers swirling wildly, the annex itself trembling. The mailman's figure blurred violently, envelopes scattering, tearing apart, dissolving into ash. His voice was a scream of fury and desperation, layers unraveling, the figure folding inward until he vanished entirely into a sudden, deafening silence. I collapsed to the floor, breath ragged, clutching the pocket watch as silence descended heavily around me. The rustling stopped. The whispers ceased. All was still. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a fragile sliver of hope. Yet as I left the annex, stepping carefully over fallen envelopes and charred paper, I knew deep in my bones that the mailman's disappearance wasn't the end. Some messages could be delayed, even refused, but ultimately, they always found their recipient. I knew then, deep in my gut, that defeating the mailman had not ended my nightmare. It had merely changed its form. With each passing night, the rustling grew louder, closer, more insistent. Every shadow in my home seemed alive with menace, whispering secrets I refused to hear. Sleep became impossible. Every time my eyes closed, I saw his pale face, those milky white eyes staring at me, waiting patiently, as inevitable as midnight itself. I checked my phone obsessively, dreading the appearance of another email, another cryptic message, another form of delivery I could neither refuse nor outrun. Then, exactly 3 nights after my confrontation at the annex, the cycle resumed with terrifying clarity. At midnight, the knocking returned. 3 deliberate taps against my front door, unmistakable, echoing through the silent house. My heart froze. It couldn't be him. I'd watched him vanish, reduced to ashes on the hotel carpet, his essence dispersed at the postal annex. But the knocking continued, louder, more forceful. Gathering what remained of my courage, I crept slowly to the door, holding my breath as I peered through the peephole. This time the porch wasn't empty. Standing perfectly still in the cold midnight air was not the mailman, but someone else, a woman I didn't recognize. Her face was pale, emotionless, and strangely familiar. She wore a postal uniform identical to his, her cap pulled low, casting deep shadows over her eyes. "No," I whispered desperately. "Not again." Her hand extended mechanically, holding out a familiar black envelope, my name shimmering in silver ink under the pale porch light. "Go away!" I shouted through the door, voice shaking. "I refuse delivery. I've already returned all messages unopened." She tilted her head slightly, voice soft yet unmistakably menacing. "You misunderstood. Returning one messenger doesn't end the message. It merely changes the courier." She paused, stepping forward, her voice barely louder than a whisper, yet clear enough to penetrate through wood and metal. "If you refuse again, you will become the messenger." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" She leaned closer, face almost touching the door, speaking slowly, deliberately. There must always be a messenger. Refuse, and it becomes your burden. You will carry the envelopes. You will feel the weight of their contents. You will deliver death at midnight. My hands trembled violently. My chest tightened painfully. The very idea of becoming that creature, bound eternally to deliver those cursed letters, filled me with overwhelming dread. "What if I accept?" I choked out, my voice strained. She pulled back slightly, silver ink shimmering unnaturally in her outstretched hand. "Then you accept your fate. You accept the message, and your suffering ends." The choice was impossible. Both paths led only to darkness. To refuse would doom me to become a monster, bound forever to the cycle. But to accept would mean willingly receiving my own death. Seconds ticked by mercilessly. I stood frozen, trapped between two terrible truths. Then, suddenly, clarity cut through the panic. There was another way. If the cycle was eternal, if refusing only passed the curse to another, then perhaps the only solution was neither acceptance nor refusal, but destruction. Slowly, deliberately, I opened the door. The woman stared at me impassively, her milky white eyes identical to the mailman's, empty yet penetrating. "Your decision?" she asked softly, envelope still extended. In a sudden movement, I seized her wrist, gripping the envelope tightly, crushing it in my hand. Her face twisted briefly, pain flashing across her pale features. "Neither acceptance nor refusal," I whispered fiercely, my voice shaking. "I'll break the cycle myself." She smiled sadly, tilting her head gently as if pitying me. "Many have tried. All have failed." I released her wrist, stepping back into the house. "Not this time," I said defiantly, backing slowly into the hallway. As she watched, silent and still, I held the black envelope tightly, then set it aflame with trembling fingers, watching the silver ink bubble and blacken as fire consumed it completely. The woman closed her eyes, expression unreadable, and whispered gently, almost sorrowfully, "You've made your choice." When she opened them again, her pupils returned, revealing eyes that were suddenly human, wide with terror and confusion. Her uniform faded into ordinary clothes. Before I could react, she stumbled backward off the porch, running blindly into the darkness. Behind me, in my now empty hand, the ashes of the envelope fell gently to the floor. I stood there, breathing heavily, heart pounding. Silence returned. The rustling ceased, and the air felt suddenly lighter, clearer. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. I had burned the message, but had I ended the curse, or merely condemned another to suffer in my place? As I closed the door and locked it tightly, my phone buzzed softly on the hallway table. The screen illuminated briefly, displaying a new message: delivery reassigned. The rustling sound intensified, filling every crevice of my home, whispering relentlessly. Each night, I waited in terrified silence, never sleeping, never resting. The email stayed unread, but its mere existence was a weight pressing into my mind. I couldn't erase it. I couldn't forget it. Then, at exactly midnight, 3 nights later, my front door swung open on its own, creaking ominously. I stood frozen at the far end of the hall, breath catching sharply in my throat. Footsteps entered slowly, soft but distinct, accompanied by the familiar whisper of shifting paper. The intruder emerged from shadow into dim moonlight, revealing a figure in a postal uniform. But it wasn't the mailman, nor the woman. It was someone new. It was Sarah, the neighbor who had died weeks ago. She was pale, her eyes milky white, empty as his had been. She held an envelope toward me, fingers trembling slightly. "Sarah," I whispered, disbelieving. "I was like you once," she said softly, her voice trembling with pain and regret. "I refused, and this is what I became." "Why are you here?" I asked, unable to move, heart hammering. "To deliver your final message." Her voice was sorrowful, pleading. "Accept it, and find peace." I shook my head, stepping back slowly. I won't. She reached up, pulling off her cap. Beneath it, her head was covered entirely in tiny black envelopes, rustling frantically against one another, alive and hungry. Tears streamed silently down her pale cheeks. Then you'll become what I am, she warned. Trapped between worlds, delivering death forever. Why is this happening? I demanded desperately, anger and terror warring within me. Who started this? It has no beginning, Sarah replied sadly. No end. The mail must always be delivered. The message always reaches the recipient. She stepped closer, trembling hand outstretched, the black envelope shimmering ominously. But I wouldn't take it. I couldn't. Instead, I lunged past her, racing into the night, determined to escape. Outside, the air was freezing, the neighborhood eerily silent. Streetlights flickered and died around me as I ran. Soon, darkness enveloped everything, a deep, oppressive shadow blotting out even the stars. Ahead, a figure appeared suddenly from nothingness, the original mailman. His pale face held no anger or malice, only resignation. Running is useless, he whispered. You carry the message within you now. My body began trembling uncontrollably as a strange sensation overtook me. Horrified, I watched as my skin shifted, rippled, transforming slowly into countless black envelopes, rustling angrily, merging with my flesh. My vision blurred, the world darkened. Deliver the mail, the mailman said quietly, almost sympathetically. It's all you have left. I felt consciousness fading, replaced by a cold certainty. My hand lifted involuntarily, holding a new envelope, a name written upon it in silver, flowing script. The name meant nothing to me, but it would mean everything to someone else. Compelled by a force beyond myself, I stepped forward into darkness, my new identity settling over me like a suffocating shroud. At exactly midnight, I raised my hand and knocked 3 times,